When she finally got off work, the sky was deep blue, plum-colored, with fading blushes of pink clouds. She thought about the puffy blanket at home in that exact shade, and how she'd slide under it soon. She boarded the subway, putting on her headphones as usual. The ride was as long as 3 of her favorite lo-fi songs, long enough to set the mood for the evening. She queued up her playlist, settling into her seat when their eyes met. The stars weren't out yet, but that didn't keep her from feeling mesmerized, as if she was discovering a new constellation, as if that star region was dedicated to what was happening right now. Was that her heart? Was it speaking to her brain in poetic whispers about how to proceed? She decided they both could use a cup of coffee. She stood when the train slowed, the doors sighing open like they were in on the moment. She didn't look back to see if they were following. She didn't need to. Something in the air told her they would. Or maybe she just hoped they would. And hope was enough to make her steps feel lighter. The station smelled like warm concrete, and the faint sweetness of roasted beans drifting from the street above. She pushed her headphones down around her neck, letting the city's hum blend with the fading lo-fi beats still whispering from the speakers. At the top of the stairs, she paused, not dramatically, just long enough to give the universe a chance to catch up. And there they were, a few steps behind, hands in pockets, breath visible in the cooling evening air. That same look in their eyes, like they'd stumbled into a moment they didn't want to break. She nodded toward the little café on the corner, the one with fogged windows and a handwritten chalkboard sign that always leaned a little crooked. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't planned. It was just right. They hesitated for half a heartbeat, then smiled, small, shy, but real, and fell into step beside her. The city lights flickered on overhead, one by one, like someone was dimming the sky just to make room for whatever this was becoming. She paused at the cafe door, somehow knowing he wanted that. He sped up to catch up, reached in front of her, and opened the door. She smiled up at him before walking in. They approached the counter but barely looked at the barista, pointing vaguely at the chalked words overhead. They were too occupied smiling shyly at one another. The barista understood his assignment. He prepared 2 cups of coffee, the kind couples usually order at this hour, and topped them both with whipped cream. He was planning on watching the impact of that order from his counter. The 2 took their mugs to a table in the corner. They both sipped, returning their mugs to the table. They both came away with creamy mustaches that sent them into giggles. The barista nodded, satisfied. Dash. The giggles lingered longer than either of them expected, dissolving whatever thin layer of awkwardness had been clinging to the moment. She wiped her upper lip with the back of her hand, still smiling, and he mirrored her without thinking, like their movements were already syncing up in small, unconscious ways. The cafe around them hummed with low conversation and the gentle clatter of cups, but their little corner felt like its own pocket of warmth, a tiny world carved out of steam and soft lighting. She wrapped her hands around her mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. He leaned forward just a little, elbows on the table, as if drawn in by gravity rather than intention. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above the murmur of the room. "Tell me what you were listening to on the train." He blinked, surprised by the question, surprised by how much he wanted to answer it honestly. "Something mellow," he said. "Something that made the city feel softer." She nodded, like she understood that feeling exactly, like she'd been living in that softness too. Outside, the sky deepened into a richer blue, the kind that makes streetlights look like stars. Inside, the barista pretended to wipe down the counter while absolutely eavesdropping. And in the corner, 2 strangers, who weren't quite strangers anymore, let the moment stretch, warm and unhurried, like the night was giving them permission to stay a little longer. The laughter softened into a comfortable hush, the kind that settles between 2 people who don't quite know each other yet, but already feel strangely at ease. She traced a fingertip along the rim of her mug, pretending to study the swirl of whipped cream melting into the coffee. He watched her do it with quiet fascination, like he was memorizing the moment without meaning to. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop. Someone hurried past the window with a scarf pulled up to their nose. The world kept moving, but in their little corner, time felt syrup slow. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath that sounded almost like a confession. "You know," he said, "I don't usually follow strangers off trains." She raised an eyebrow, playful. "Oh, and what made tonight different?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud felt like stepping onto a thin, thrilling ledge. "You look like someone who sees things. The way the city lights hit you, it was like you were already in a story." Her cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. "Maybe I was." The barista, still pretending to wipe the same spot on the counter, grinned into his sleeve. A soft silence settled again, not empty, but full of possibility. She nudged her mug a little closer to his. He mirrored the gesture without thinking. 2 cups, 2 hands. One small table holding a moment neither of them wanted to end. They drank their coffee and talked about their shared taste in music. How they'd never been to that shop, though they'd seen it 100 times before. How they were both single, but not looking, both waiting on someone special. They blushed while admitting it. To the chagrin of the barista, he offered to walk her home. But not before the barista would tell Instagram about the cute couple he'd served that evening. They passed small restaurants they realized they'd never tried, because they'd been single. They promised each other they'd visit together. He pointed at a pet shop he wanted to take her to. She agreed. She teased as she pointed at a tattoo parlor. He raised a single eyebrow. "I don't know about that." She laughed a bit louder at seeing his expression. He saw how beautiful she looked when she let go. "Well, maybe," he said with a shrug. They arrived at his place first. He lived in a small apartment building. His little brother was waiting for him, waving down. He told him he'd be back in a bit. The boy looked at her and waved. She waved back, smiling. They arrived at her place only a block and 1 corner over. She marveled at how close they lived to each other. "Fate," he said simply. They stood there in front of her apartment building for a moment, wondering how to say goodbye. Kiss? Too much. Hug? Maybe. "May I hold your hand?" he asked finally. He reached out and she placed her hand in his. He sighed. "So are we doing pets first, or tattoos?" he asked, gaining courage. She laughed again. He decided it was his new favorite sound. One day they would retell this story to their children. When emboldened, the kids would ask if they got those tattoos. The couple would only smile at them and sip their coffee with whipped cream. The night settled around them like a blessing. Cool air, soft streetlights, the faint hum of the city winding down. Their hands stayed linked a moment longer than necessary, neither of them willing to be the first to let go. It wasn't a kiss, and it didn't need to be. Some beginnings are quieter than that. Some beginnings are just 2 warm palms meeting in the dark. She squeezed his hand once before slipping free. He stepped back, but not far, just enough to see her face clearly. "Good night," he said, voice low, like he didn't want to disturb the magic they'd built between subway stops and whipped cream mustaches. "Good night," she echoed, and the word felt like a promise. He waited until she was safely inside before turning toward home. His steps lighter than they'd been in years. His little brother would be waiting with questions. The barista would be posting his blurry, over-romanticized story to Instagram. The city would keep spinning. But for tonight, he let himself believe in fate, in timing, in the way 2 people can pass each other 100 times and only collide when the universe is ready. And somewhere in the near future, a pet shop, a tattoo parlor, a shared apartment, a pair of kids asking about the night it all began, they would laugh and sip their whipped cream coffees and say, "It started with a train ride, and a look, and a feeling we couldn't ignore.